They didn't ask. They just took me. One minute I was aboard the Vigilant Dawn, prepping diagnostics on the forward rail array. The next, I was waking up in a cold alien forest under a blood-red sky with two moons glaring down like twin eyes. My gear was stripped down to the basics: combat fatigues, a survival knife, a flask of water, and an old-school earpiece jammed into my skull with unfamiliar tech humming behind it. Then the voice started. A specimen 927H, it said in perfect English. Quid say? Resist with vigor. No explanation, no diplomacy. Just that smug, clinical tone. I stood up slowly, ears tuned for movement. The place reeked of wrong plants that pulsed instead of swayed insects that chirped in quad-tonal harmonics. I spotted one of the cameras within minutes, hovering like a metallic mosquito, tracking my movements. It wanted a show. They thought I was prey. That was their first mistake. I spent the first hour mapping the terrain, noting the scent of water and signs of movement, deep, three-toed tracks in the mud, not human. Something bipedal heavy. Too regular for native fauna. They were already watching, maybe even circling. I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. Not yet. I found a ridge overlooking a ravine choked with twisted vines and carved a spear from the local hardwood. It smelled acidic, but held an edge. I tore my shirt sleeve tied strips around the shaft for grip and smeared mud across my face and arms. They wanted to see how a human struggled. I'd show them how we adapted. Night fell fast. Sky turned darker than anything I'd ever seen, pierced by constellations unfamiliar to any earthborn eye. And then the howling began, deep, echoing, predatory. Not just one voice, a chorus. That was when the earpiece clicked again. A round one, initiated. 5 entrants, 1 human, commence. I crouched low back to a moss-covered boulder and waited. My heartbeat slowed. Not out of fear, but focus. I'd trained for hostile environments, but this was more than hostile. It was ritualized slaughter, an apex predator showcase. And I was the wild card they didn't understand. The first hunter came at me loud, crashing through the brush, cloaked in shimmering scales and arrogance. He was 9 feet tall, armored, and armed with twin plasma eyes. He didn't even slow down when he spotted me. That was his second mistake. I dodged the first swing and drove my spear into the soft joint under his ribs. He screamed, more out of confusion than pain, I think. I rolled, grabbed one of his blades as he fell, and buried it in his neck. 1 down, 4 to go. I looked up at the hovering camera, its lens twitching. Somewhere out there they were watching. "You call this a hunt?" I whispered, wiping blood across my cheek. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. They didn't know humans don't run from monsters. We become them." The next morning, I found the first signal node by following a trail of static humming through the brush. It was hidden inside what looked like an artificial termite mound, organic camouflage shielding hardened alien tech. Sloppy. They hadn't expected me to go looking for their infrastructure. They thought I'd be too busy surviving. That was mistake number 3. It didn't take long to crack the interface. They'd wired my cerebral implant into their network, probably for monitoring vitals or stress response. I used it to force a handshake with the relay system. Suddenly, I wasn't just hearing their broadcasts. I was seeing them. Streams of data, betting odds, live footage feeds. My heartbeat fed into a ticker line alongside my estimated odds of survival. 10%. Cute. There were multiple channels, each showing different arenas, different species. Some fought, some ran, most died. I watched a scaled creature with 6 limbs get torn apart by a hunter I recognized from last night's chorus. The crowd cheered. The display spiked with bioluminescent glyphs, applause. They called it the Hunt Eternal, a tradition stretching back millennia. Each cycle, they abducted warriors, predators, soldiers, and dumped them into curated deathworld environments. Then the Apex clans took turns hunting them for sport, honor, and spectacle. I read the scroll of past champions. None were human. None had lasted longer than 3 days. Until now. The feed zoomed in on me, my face streaked with mud and blood, my expression cold and unblinking as I stared at the corpse of the first hunter. The commentators, if that's what they were, argued in their chittering language. Subtitles rendered a rough translation. Primitive response. Unlikely to sustain advantage, unexpected kill. I grinned. They still didn't get it. They brought me here thinking I was another wild animal. But humanity isn't just good at surviving. We're obsessive about it. We reverse engineer threats. We adapt so quickly it scares even us. And when pushed to the brink, we don't fold. We evolve. The odds on me shifted. 10% climbed to 16. Someone was betting on me now. Good. Let them. I used the access to scan for hunter chatter, intercepted comms, target acquisition patterns, thermal overlays. The next squad had landed already. They moved in formation, cloaked, efficient. This wasn't a hunting party anymore. This was a search and destroy op. Someone in their hierarchy was nervous. Back at the body of the first hunter, I recovered his comms collar and set it up as a decoy beacon. I left it on a dead tree transmitting my own heartbeat on loop and rigged the area with sharpened spikes coated in sap I'd learned was mildly acidic, strong enough to eat through armored joints if given time. The hunters were organized, experienced, and equipped. But they weren't scared yet. They would be. I looked into one of the hovering drones still watching me from above and raised my middle finger. Let the audience interpret that however they wanted. You want a show? I'll give you one they'll never forget. They came at dusk. 3 of them fanning out through the jungle like shadows, cloaked, nearly silent, armed with wrist-mounted blasters and blades that shimmered like mercury. They thought they were predators, elegant, efficient, superior. They had no idea I'd been watching them for over an hour. I'd learned their movement patterns through intercepted comms and drone footage. How they flanked, how they swept in wide arcs to force prey into ambush points. I used that. I let them think they were hurting me. Instead, they walked straight into my trap. The clearing was narrow, funneling them between 2 enormous fungal growths that towered like alien redwoods. Beneath the mossy floor were pits I'd spent the entire afternoon carving, shallow enough to conceal, deep enough to break ankles. I laced the underbrush with lines of woven vine tension to trigger the sap-coated spikes I'd fashioned from bone and sharpened stone. When the first one hit the trepline, the jungle exploded with sound. The spikes launched upward, piercing his leg and slicing through his thigh armor. He screeched, firing wildly as he crumpled. I was already moving. I sprang from the undergrowth, drove a jagged shard of his own gear into the soft plate under his jaw, and used his falling body as a shield against the blaster bolts that followed. His companions hesitated. That was their mistake. Fear! I saw it. Raw animal rising behind their high-tech helmets. They hadn't expected this. None of them had. In all their years of hunting, they'd never met something that hunted back. I vanished into the trees as they recalibrated. Their sensors weren't calibrated for a deathworlder scent signature, especially not when masked by alien mud and internal thermal bleeding. My heat signature was erratic on purpose. I'd learned how to control my breathing, slow my heartbeat, make myself invisible in all the ways that mattered. When the second one peeled off to flank me, I dropped on him from above, driving a jagged branch into his throat and twisting until the gurgling stopped. His death call didn't sound like fear. It sounded like confusion. Why is this happening? His body seemed to ask. Because you underestimated us. The third one ran. I let him. Not because I couldn't catch him, but because I wanted him to run. Let him tell the others. Let him stammer into whatever command structure they had left and explain what he'd seen. A human, bloodied but smiling, surrounded by corpses of the hunters who were supposed to be unstoppable. Let them spread the word. I sat in the clearing for a moment, surrounded by the bodies, blood steaming in the humid air. The camera drone buzzed overhead, focused tightly on my face. I stared into it and whispered, "Do you understand yet?" I wiped the blood from my blade, stood, and vanished into the jungle again. The hunt had changed. Now they were being hunted. They started calling me a myth. I overheard it in the intercepted chatter, low-frequency comms packed with static and panic. They spoke in clipped alien tongues, but the translation overlays filtered it down to one word that kept surfacing again and again: Vorhak. Their language didn't have a direct translation, but the closest match, the monster that returns, a story they told their children. A spirit of vengeance from the old times. That was me now. Not a soldier, not even a human. A monster. Their war halls ran beneath the surface, hidden in a network of basalt caverns lit by bioluminescent runes and thermal coils. I got in by wearing the armor of the third hunter I killed, gutted, scorched, reconfigured. The suit didn't fit perfectly, but it fooled their sensors. I walked among them in silence, watching their rituals, their planning, their desperate recalibration. They burned incense made from crystallized bone. They sang dirges in guttural harmony. I watched one of them slash his own palm and paint warnings on the walls. They weren't preparing for a hunt anymore. They were preparing for war. Then she arrived, 7 feet tall, lean and brutal. And brutal. Her armor bore no insignia, only deep ritual scarring etched into the plating. She walked with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. Her name, translated, meant Scourge of the Void. A veteran of 1,000 hunts. She didn't ask for a briefing. She demanded to face me alone. The others objected. She silenced them with a gesture. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and venomous. "He is not prey," she said. "He is enemy, and I will show him the mercy of a warrior's death." I followed her out of the war hall, keeping to the shadows, watching as she trekked to the surface. She didn't take an escort, didn't want backup. She believed in ritual, in tradition, in the old ways. I believed in winning. The ambush wasn't elegant. It wasn't even fair. I caught her at the edge of a cliffside pass, drop smoke and flashbangs stolen from a dead hunter's pouch, and hit her with 2 heavy plasma bolts to the chest. She staggered, snarled, dropped to one knee, and laughed. She dropped her weapons and charged. I met her head on. No tricks, no traps. Just 2 species colliding in raw, brutal violence. She moved like lightning, striking with a grace honed over centuries. I fought like a cornered wolf, every motion powered by instinct and hate. It ended when I shattered her jaw with the butt of a stolen rifle and shoved a blade into the gap in her collar. She looked at me, blood running down her chin, and rasped, "You are not like the others." "No," I said, crouching beside her. "I'm worse." When she finally stopped breathing, I carved a single mark into the cliffside. Not a name, not a trophy, just a message, a warning. Let them fear the dark, because that's where I live now. They stopped sending individuals after that. The next wave came as a coordinated assault, drones, heat seekers, orbital scans. They weren't hunting anymore. They were cleansing, scouring entire regions of the arena with fire and radiation bursts in hopes of smoking me out. Somewhere, someone in their chain of command had stopped pretending this was still a game. I wasn't a contestant anymore. I was a threat to the system, a virus in their perfect little blood sport. I stayed one step ahead. Living off the land had stopped being a necessity. It had become second nature. I knew which fruits numbed the nerves and which bark soothed infection. I'd learned to listen to the pulse of the jungle, to feel when something was wrong in the air. The birds went silent before drones arrived. The insects buzzed with a pitch too sharp when energy fields activated. One afternoon, I found a drop pod embedded in a crater. It was fresh, maybe 6 hours old, half melted, scorched from a bad atmospheric entry. Inside was a creature I'd never seen before, but I recognized the look in his eyes, confused, terrified, and angry. Another abductee. He was reptilian, humanoid, armed with primitive gear, stone blades, and Keaton armor. Barely conscious. I dragged him out before the fire reached the fuel cells. Took a full hour before he was alert enough to speak. His name was something unpronounceable. I called him Rek. He asked me if I was one of the elders. I told him no. I was human. He didn't know what that meant, just nodded slowly and said, "Then I'll follow the demon." I didn't argue. Why? We weren't allies yet, but I wasn't going to let someone else die just because I was used to being alone. I taught him how to read the sky for the shimmer of drones, how to cover his scent with ash and sap, how to kill quickly, silently. He showed me how to move through the trees without disturbing the root song beneath the soil. His species had been hunted for generations in these arenas, and he knew where the oldest tunnels were. Together, we dismantled their surveillance net, one relay at a time. I showed him how to reroute their tech. He showed me how to vanish completely from thermal scans by curling inside certain hollow trees that leached body heat. Day by day, the odds kept shifting. My survival percentage hit 38%, then 51%, then 67%. They tried to deny it. They called it an anomaly. But I could hear it in their voices now. Fear. Not just of me, but of what I represented. I wasn't just surviving. I was infecting their narrative. The hunters were supposed to be untouchable. The prey, noble but doomed. But now there was a human. And worse, now there were 2. When I looked into Rek's eyes, I saw it there too. Not worship, hope. And that scared them more than any weapon ever could. They tried to cut the signal. Seconds after our first transmission hit the upper atmosphere, their response was immediate, Jamming towers flared to life across the horizon, scrambling frequencies and blanketing the sky with static, but we'd planned for that. Rex people had passed down songs older than any circuit, encoded in tonal bursts that could travel beneath even the thickest interference. I turned those songs into a message, not just data, footage of the arena, of the blood, of the truth. We bounced it through every relay we could hijack. Even as their towers burned the spectrum, we stitched our voice through the cracks like smoke slipping through a locked door. The message was short, raw, a simple phrase spoken in dozens of tongues. You are not prey anymore. And then we showed them the footage of my first kill, brutal and close, the shattered armor of the Scourge of the Void still clutched in my hands, the images of Rex standing beside me unbroken. And finally, the moment we detonated their food supply depot with scavenged charges, because starvation makes even apex predators desperate. It worked. Not all at once, not in some glorious galaxy-shaking instant, but like a fracture spreading through stone. First it was whispers, then murmurs, then full rebellion. We saw it in the sky. Signals lit up that hadn't pulsed in decades, ancient emergency beacons from lost races who'd been written off as extinct. I tracked a pulse coming from the Midrethi sector, where entire civilizations had once been a cleansed for the hunt. It was a beacon singing back to us, not human. Not even friendly, but listening. That was enough. The Apex Hunters responded in kind. No more elegant assassins or cloaked patrols. They started dropping gunships. Not to hunt, to exterminate. The jungle burned for days, choked black by chemical fire, trees falling like bones. We ran until our lungs burst. Rek took a shot to the side, and I had to carry him 2 clicks on my back before we found shelter. We hid in a collapsed observation outpost, buried beneath charred foliage. I held pressure to his wound while the air above shimmered with orbital heat signatures. You could leave me? Rek groaned. They fear you, not me. They fear the idea, I said, and now it's bigger than either of us. That night, while he drifted in and out of fevered sleep, I carved the symbol again. Not for victory, not for remembrance, for momentum. A crude human glyph etched into steel with a hunter's shattered blade. Hope doesn't need polish, it just needs weight. When the sky finally cleared, we climbed the ridge together, battered but alive. Below, in the valley, I saw movement, shapes too small to be drones. Survivors, rebels. Others who'd seen the broadcast. I looked at Rek, he bared his teeth. They're coming, I said. Good, he rasped. I'll let them come. This wasn't survival anymore. This was revolution. The capital was uglier than I imagined. It wasn't the shining pinnacle of apex civilization I'd expected. It was rot wrapped in gold. Towering spires loomed over streets soaked in silence. Ornate predator statues snarled from every corner, their fangs eternal, their eyes cold. It smelled like ozone, grease, and fear. Whatever glory this place once had was long since hollowed out, propped up by rituals and conquest. We didn't land with fanfare. We crashed in scorched and trailing smoke. The old dropship wheezed as it touched down in a forgotten industrial sector, where even their elite rarely wandered. My armor was held together with welds and stolen plating. Rek limped beside me, his chest bandaged, one arm in a sling. Around us were the others, refugees, fighters, survivors. No uniform, no flag. Just scars and grit. We didn't need a flag. The moment we stepped into their capital, their illusion began to unravel. The transmissions we'd sent, raw footage, survival logs, intercepted comms, had reached deeper than we expected. Underground networks lit up. Subspecies, once enslaved, now rose from the depths, claws sharpened. Their hounds turned on their masters. Whispers spread through the towers like poison. The humans are here. The apex have fallen. The prey's fighting back. We moved through the city like a storm front, not an army, a reckoning. By the time we reached the Hall of Culling, their leadership compound, their guards had already abandoned their posts. Inside, I found tapestries made of skin and skulls. A room full of trophies, frozen in arrogance. I set fire to it, without a word. There was one left waiting, an elder. One of the original huntmasters. He didn't fight. He just stood there, claws folded behind his back, staring through the smoke at me like I was a ghost. He asked what I wanted. You already know, I said. He told me this galaxy had always needed order. That apex rule brought balance, kept the weak in line. That something must always sit at the top of the chain. I walked up to him, close enough to hear the trembling in his voice. Allah's order, I said. Until you started believing you were gods. Then I put a slug through his crown and left his body on their ancestral throne. By nightfall, their banners had been torn down. The city lit up, not with fire but with song. Each street echoed with voices not heard in generations. Free voices. Voices of species that had only ever screamed or wept under the heel of the hunt. I stood on the highest platform as the crowds gathered. I didn't give a speech, just looked out over a galaxy breathing for the first time. They'd called humans monsters. Maybe we were, but we were their monsters now. Let them remember we didn't conquer to rule. We rose to remind them you should never corner something that's already bleeding, because that's when it bites back.